steps and where there could be funding specifically for what you guys are looking to do. So Lindsay, let's see what the time does on that end. And maybe what we could do is do the Q&As, and I'm happy to do like a few minutes with each company and just kind of chat about, hey, look into this or that. But I think you'll get a lot out of this. So I think the key thing to disclaim at the start is that the details that I'll be chatting about today in terms of the different types of programs, these programs change on a weekly basis sometimes. Some of them have changed, like the program that I've seen change the most is a training program in BC, and it changed 82 times in the first 3 years. So it's really important to know that if you're watching this as a recorded video, the information on here might not be relevant once you watch the video. Some of it will be, but some of it may not be. So especially if I'm naming specific programs. We are also not the government. So this information is based on our best knowledge. And if you have more questions about a particular grant, you should be looking at the application guidelines for each specific program, okay? So let's start with a stat fact. Just prior to COVID, and I know COVID has changed a lot in terms of who has leveraged grants, and the statistics are actually quite a bit higher now, which is great. But there were only about 5% of businesses in a study done by Bank of Montreal in 2019 that actually went after grant funding. And out of that 5%, I'm going to say only 1%, in accordance to the survey, said that they found the process easy. So what do we do here? You know, like grants are available to businesses, which is one thing that a lot of people, first of all, didn't even know of. They assume that grants are only available to nonprofits, to charities. That's absolutely not the case. And, you know, how do we get this information out there so that small businesses can leverage grants? So we're going to chat a little bit today about the size of grants that we'd be looking at, things like what you need to have in place to be successful, information that will just help you in your journey as an entrepreneur, and maybe even your journey as an employee one day down the road, right? Because you might work for a company in the future and be their CFO and manage their finance and be like, hey, I remember hearing Stephanie saying, the grant angel, talk about grants in 2021, and I should look into that. So that's the goal, is just to ensure that everyone here is comfortable with this, okay? And I will say it's a little bit similar to bursaries, so we can chat about that as well. So today I'll be chatting about grant factors, what you'll need to have in place to be successful in applying for grants, what you'll need to get started as well, different types of grants. So I think I'm going to bust some myths here today in terms of, is there funding for machinery? Is there funding for me to start my business? Is there funding for me to, as a maybe a graduate student or an undergrad student under the age of whatever, as a female, as a visible minority, whatever your demographic might be, there's got to be a pot of gold somewhere out there. And so I'm going to tell you that it doesn't quite work the way that a lot of people assume. And I'm sure that you've heard this, like, oh, you're starting your business. Oh, there should be tons of grant money for you because you're a student and you're this and that. And it's like, yeah, there's some money, but it's not a ton, as they, probably express to you. And then just in terms of what is a grant strategy, and this is where we'll go into a deeper dive under helping you understand that grants are not about just the now. So although there might be limited grants to start your business or limited funding to go and buy machinery and things like that you might want to do, the reality is there are grants that you can be leveraging throughout the year. So we're going to cover what a grant strategy is. And then I'll give you some resources in terms of how to find grants. And we'll go through a couple of case studies of how others have done it. So let's talk about the grant factors to start off with. The important thing to know is there have to be some business basics, including grantors want to know how many years in business you've been around. So for some of you who are still students or second time students, whatever it might be, maybe registering your business now and ensuring that you are registered as a sole proprietor, or if you're revenue generating already, making sure that you register yourself as an incorporated business, or if there's risks associated with your business where you want to incorporate, do it sooner rather than later. because sometimes it's like, oh, I established my business in 2021. Sounds a heck of a lot better than 3 years down the road when you apply and you're like, I'm a brand new startup. So that's one thing to consider. The number of employees sometimes does make a difference for some programs as well. This is more so with sometimes hiring programs. So hiring programs will say, well, you want to bring on 8 new employees. They all are students, but you're a one-stop shop and you're a one-person shop. And so how is that going to work for you? And so we want to make sure that there's some reasonable outcomes when it comes to leveraging things like hiring grants, that you are able to keep these people employed, or that you're giving them a really good experience when they're working with you. So that's something to think about as well. There are also very specific industry grants. So if you guys are looking at biotech or food processing or clean tech, maybe even in service-based businesses that are a little bit more specific in terms of the type of trades and services that you provide, things like that would also help. I mean, recently that you've seen a push in tourism grants, and so that's very specific to the tourism industry only. So there's different types of grants for different industries, and some industries are just supported more than others. So if you're looking to start a restaurant, less support. If you're looking to, do beauty or hair salon or anything, that less support. If you're looking for technology based, definitely more. So it's just a range. In terms of financial, another thing that's important for you to remember is that grants are typically a payback process now. So the word grant is what we use because we're familiar what that is in common language. But what the government uses is funding agreement. And what that means is you put in the money first, and then you can make your claim back, but we'll tell you how much funding we're going to give you over the course of the term of your project. So what that requires is you have to have some money to apply for some grants. Like, it's very difficult. And this happened first, like one of the first clients I ever got, this was back in 2010. I didn't realize what he was doing, but he was waiting for the grant before he actually paid his staff. And I was like, no, you have to pay your staff and issue them pay stubs and make sure that they're, on top of paying per employment standards. And so it's just something that you need to be aware of. Financial security is also important. So there's a lot of companies that they're in financial distress because of the COVID pandemic. And so if you are a company that is in distress, unlikely will you get grant funding. And the reason is, even though the funding isn't necessarily repayable, so you don't have to pay it back, it's not a loan, it does require that you are able to proceed with and complete the activities that are listed out. So if you are in financial distress and you go and apply for $100,000 to expand into a new market, they give you the funding or the agreement, and then your company goes belly up. That doesn't look amazing for the government. So that's one of the things to be aware of. Every year or so, I will get a call saying, hey, Steph, if I don't get a grant, I'm going under. And I'm like, you're going under, because there's no grant that's going to be able to save you from that. So just a heads up on that. Your track record is important. I don't know if this happens with bursaries. Some of you guys might apply for scholarships and bursaries, but if this scholarship or bursary asked you to ensure that you do this type of reporting, and then you don't do it, and the next year you're like, hey, I want this bursary or scholarship again, they're probably like, nope, we're not going to give it to you. So it's really important that you have a good track record. And so even if you don't complete your activities, make sure that the grantors are they're aware of what's happened. Maybe somebody quit, or maybe you weren't able to get them to sign off on a document because they had to travel and they don't have access to their emails, whatever it might be. Make sure that you do communicate challenges throughout the grant with the grantors so that they're aware of what's going on and they can assist you if they can. And then the other thing that I'm going to say in terms of a grant factor is putting Canada on the map. So what often happens is between two companies, there will be one that is a little bit more grantable because what they're doing is quite novel. And so if all you're doing is selling coffee mugs or pens, that's probably not super novel. But if you're creating a competitor to the iPhone, then the Canadian government might be a little bit more interested. So that does sway the decision that way. So to get started with grants, things like making sure that your company is registered properly. This does not include just your provincial registration. It also includes things like your city business license. So there's a program here in BC, and I'm sure this is a applicable across the provinces as well. But in BC, they started changing what they asked for in terms of company registration. They started asking for a valid business license. And I would say that 30% of my clients did not upkeep their business license, so that screwed them. And they were therefore not allowed to and not able to apply for government funding. So it's really important that this is something that is looked into. Make sure that you are compliant with WorkSafe or WCB. Workers' compensation is WCB. And if you require general liability insurance, that is dealt with and taken care of as well. Making sure that you are researching grants. So I mentioned at the very start of this presentation, you may or may not be able to find grants that you're looking for right away for the activities that you're doing, but grants change all the time. So there's an opportunity for you to do research kind of throughout the year and try to find what grants meet the needs of your business and do it that way, right? Identify the needs of your business first and then match the grants to that, not the other way around. So you don't want to be like, oh, there's a grant for me to go to India and go and do market expansion there. Let me go to India. Like that doesn't really work well for the trajectory of your business and takes you off your rails. So you just want to make sure that you're doing it the other way. So we'll cover that in a couple of minutes in building your grant strategy. So it is important that you have a marketing strategy. I'm sure you have a sales strategy, or looking to build your finance strategy. And the grant strategy is actually part of your finance strategy. So it's important that you consider grants as a non-dilutive. So that means that it doesn't mean that if the government gives you grants that they take a share of your business. That doesn't happen. And it's non-repayable, which means that you don't have to pay it back. So it really is the best type of funding that's available out there, but it's also a little bit more limited. Be prepared to be flexible. So ideas on that might be, let's say there's a grant that will come up at the beginning of the government fiscal year, which starts in April. You want to make sure that you have some flexibility around that so that if you want to hire someone in March, you kind of go, I wonder if I should just wait until April. And the answer is, if you want a grant, yes. Because at the end of the fiscal year, you might only get half a month of hiring or training subsidy. But if you start in the beginning of a new fiscal year, it's a new budget. So you can extend your runway a little bit longer. And the other thing to note is that grants are taxable. So it is considered income. I actually got an email from someone yesterday saying, I don't know if I want to use grants. And I was like, what? Because it's taxable income. And I said, but you're paying what, 13, 15%, corporate tax max, or if you're a little bit bigger, maybe more than that, 20%, but you get 100% of your grant back. Like the math there just didn't make sense to me. So I wrote him back and I just said, yes, they're taxable, but here's the math on it. And I just took an example and shared it with him. So just know that this is something that you guys have to acknowledge, that should you be leveraging grants, that this sits on your P&L as a revenue line. Okay, so what are grants usually used for? Hiring. So hiring youth, and that is all of you on the call likely, or most of you, under the age of 30 is what the Canadian government deems as youth. Recent immigrants or those who are in EI, so employment insurance. There's also those with disabilities. And I mentioned at I guess when Lindsay reached out and said, hey, what are you going to be covering? I was like, hey, maybe we should cover how to hire your friends. And so you could hire your friends as a co-op student. You could hire them as a general student. You don't even have to do co-op, and it'll cover 75% of their wages. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. Now, obviously, you have to pay for this payroll. So it's not like, hey, let me say I'm going to hire you, and then let's just split the money. It doesn't work that way, because you'll have to put people on payroll. You have to submit pay stubs. You have to talk about what they're doing in the job. And so just make sure that you don't get too creative with things like that. On the training side, things to do with fundamental training like safety courses, technical training, software training, anything to do with machinery training. Maybe it's soft skills, like you want to learn a little bit more about emotional intelligence, or you want to learn about organization skills or communication. Also management, leadership, and there's apprentice training subsidies as well. So those are all different types of training grants that you can leverage. I usually encourage companies that are you're in your first year, you've identified there's some gaps in your business, and you realize that you need to either hire a new person to help you with it, whether it's a contractor or a consultant, or maybe a new employee, or you could give that training, give some training to somebody that you're already working with, another employee, and upskill them so that all of that knowledge stays within your business. And I feel like that is a really good return on investment if you invest in the right type of training for your company. So just keep that in mind. Depending on where you're from and where you're setting up your business, maybe as a business owner, you also could qualify for training. This does not mean that you can get your university courses all covered under these training grants, but if your province allows for you to obtain training for the business owners themselves, you do qualify for it. If they allow for it, then you could qualify for it, and you can take a look at what courses you are taking that would be relevant to you growing your business, okay, and apply for some of the tuition associated with that. Market expansion. So once you get to a stage, and this is probably the second year into business or beyond, where you are looking to expand beyond the Canadian market, or maybe you're like, hey, Steph, we're just going to jump directly into the US market because they have 300 million people and we only have 30 million people here in Canada. I'm going to say, make sure that you have hit at least 6 figures before you look at market expansion grants. So the grants could be helping you increase your marketing in a new market, or it could be working with foreign partners. So imagine if you have a technology and it can be paired with another technology in Germany or in Japan. And you're like, hey, I wonder if my IP could match their IP, and we can collaborate together to create a new technology. Things like that, the Canadian government's really interested in. So there's some opportunities there. And then that leads you to research and development grants. So collaboration with post-secondary institutions, which obviously you guys are involved with, programs like MyTax, NCERC, anything that's an acronym is really research and development focused. So taking a look at SHRED tax credits, those are all things that I would look at. Remember that research and development tends to lean on activities that are pre-commercialization. So once your product is out there, it is hard to then apply for grants under research and development. Excuse me, too much talking. Excuse me. So job creation is one of the key things that they're looking at with the government. Upskilling workforce, also revenues to increase taxes. That's why the Canadian government's like, yeah, go and expand into the US or go and expand to Europe. And what happens is that increases your revenues, which therefore increases the taxes that you pay back to the Canadian government. And then the goal for research and development is to build innovation here in Canada. So that's kind of what it looks like. I wanted to cover a micro business funding strategy with you guys, because as a startup, early stage, pre-revenue, whatever you're at, or maybe you're on your second venture, but this might still apply for you. It's assessing your team and knowing what those knowledge gaps are and what are the HR gaps that you have. Maybe you're really good at coding, but you're not really good at biz dev. Maybe you're really good at biz dev, but you're not really good at marketing. So understanding what that looks like, and then maybe finding a way to hire your classmates to help you with those gaps. Okay, so that's one side of things. The other is, once you've got your core team, you start needing more staff. You need to then assess the difference between using a contractor versus using a staff member. And so making sure that if you are hiring people on contract, know that they're likely not grantable. It's rare. Like sometimes they'll have a contractor agreement that you can apply for with some market expansion grants, and there's like a little bit of funding with that. But most of these grants, as mentioned in the last slide, geared towards decreasing unemployment, increasing employment here in Canada. So what they want are people on payroll. And then looking at things like loans. So I'm sure there's Futurepreneur that you might be able to access. That's for companies where the founders are under the age of 39. And it comes with some mentorship as well. Operational costs, like what is it that you need? Should you use a loan for some of that? Would it be BDC? Like who are the players in there? What would you use for equipment and land? And so anytime you have something that is collateral or something that the bank could take away, banks are really kind of the way to go for that. I would keep some of the operational costs away from banks because they tend not to fund for things like that. And as a tech startup, loans are a little bit more challenging, not impossible, but there's only a few players that will play in that area as well. And then, this is probably the stage where you're looking at domestic expansion. So you're in Manitoba now, and you're looking to expand into Western Canada, the rest of the provinces, or into Ontario, or into the Maritimes, whatever it might be, or Quebec, or even north. And so that's kind of at that stage, you're looking at loans to figure out how you can expand. Then you would go into international marketing and go and blow up everything that you did here in Canada and expand it and increase that bubble so that you can reach more customers abroad. And that's, the full circle is looking at these other research and development type of grant programs that might be very project specific. So you have a developed technology or something that product that you've already created, and now you're looking at increasing the usability of it for a different audience. So you need to tweak it so that that can happen. That might be some research and development type of programs there as well. And you might want to hire based on that particular project. So it doesn't mean you have to bring someone on for a whole year or maybe even 2 years. You could maybe give them spurts of employment based on what the needs are for your project. And then there's some regional programs as well. Recently, WD, Western Diversification, is a source of funding. It tends to fund nonprofits and organizations that then support the businesses within the Western provinces. They're breaking it up and they're going by province. And it makes more sense to me, because the needs of those businesses in Manitoba are greatly different from the needs of businesses in BC or, in the northern part of Alberta. So it's good that they're kind of breaking that up, but you can take a look and see what additional funding, probably loan programs, are available. If you're in a rural rural area, there's possibly some additional loan programs for that as well. Okay, so we talked about the grants not being about the now, and that's really important. So how do you do this? You come up with your strategy plan at the beginning of your year, whatever your year is. You kind of go, okay, I'm going to be hiring this number of people for this first quarter, or I expect to invest in some market testing or some product market validation in this quarter. And then I expect to be building out my technology here. So I will need some R&D activities happening. And then I might want to send some of the staff that I hired on in that first quarter to some training and fill their knowledge gaps. So the important thing is to remember that the grants are not about what's happening right now. So just because you are on this webinar today does not mean that you just go after every and all grant opportunities that are available to you. You really need to parse out and figure out what makes sense for your business and apply for grant funding throughout the year. Because if you do it the other way, you get super overwhelmed because it's like, oh my God, I have to hire this person. Then I got to go and get training. And I know the money's out there and you're like, I don't want to lose out. The FOMO is real. But I will say it's also really important that you stick with your plan for your business and that you continue on with it, but have some flexibility in terms of like when you hire someone, so that maybe that matches a little bit of the timeframes of the grant. So just keep that in mind. In terms of finding grants, granted ourselves, we had built our own proprietary software that covers all grants across Canada. So you guys will be getting copies of this presentation. I'll send it over to Lindsay afterwards. So there are live links on there, but if you just Google Get Granted, you'll find it. It's a SaaS play, so it's a subscription service for the year, but here's the benefit. Remember how I was like, in one of these slides, I said you have to research? What happens is you leverage the team at Granted to do your research for you. And the system will send you grant notifications that match your company profile. So there's a benefit there. And I think when I built this technology back in 2019, I really wanted people to not have to worry about missing out. I wanted them to feel assured that if they get a grant notification that the grant research has been done, it's been simplified to layman's terms, because some of these grant application guides can be 40 to 60 pages long. And we try to summarize it within 2 or 3 pages of bullet points. So it's a lot easier to read. Innovation Canada also has a different type of product as well. They're improving on it. They apparently also have a grant notification system. I've tried it. It doesn't work quite the way that I expected it to. But the challenge with this is it only links you to that particular program's website. So all the work in terms of reading the application guidelines and all that's still on you. Pocketed has popped up, and I know Brianna quite well. Good for startups, but this is the thing. They are a marketplace that connects people interested in grants and they have some grant research available to grant writers, which would be us, or another company like us. So just remember that they don't actually do the grant for you, is my understanding of how they work. And then of course, my best friend is Google. And I find a lot of grants on Google. You just have to know what those search terms are, and you have to be able to research it quite regularly. So we have a team at Granted that manages that. So this is a screenshot of what Get Granted looks like. You guys can go on there and get your free list of grants and see if there's something that will come up. There was one that recently launched, I want to say this week, has to do with, oh, I'm going to mess this up, but I'll see if I can find the link for you guys afterwards and send it over to Lindsay. But it has to do with Manitoba based organizations where you're on an entrepreneurial journey, and you can then also get $15,000 for yourself to build out your project. And usually it has to do with some research and development and some product market validation. And then there's another $5,000 that you can get from your faculty. So I don't know if Lindsay or Deborah, one of you guys know that program name. I just looked at that grant card yesterday. It's not coming to me. I'm being a little bit dory today. So yeah, I can also include it in the follow-up email that I send back to you guys. So we've got 5 minutes before Q&A. So I just wanted to go through, what does a micro business, kind of service-based business use in terms of grants? So company size is 2 partners, started leveraging grants last year. Their savings was $37,800. It allowed the business owners to pivot and learn new skills. So they took advantage of some of the training grants. It helped them survive COVID because there's some, grants available associated with that. They were able to hire a team member to offset the costs of marketing that they were outsourcing, and they were able to explore other funding options as well. But beyond the business, I think what's really important is also chatting about personal impact. So what does this mean? If people are able to learn new skills and pivot, they're not as worried, so they can sleep at night. So the best thing is that work-life balance. Also, it allowed these business owners to be working more on the business as opposed to in the business. And they were able to then develop a little bit more on how to scale their operations financially. So that, I think, is really important. So this is a early stage business. We'll go to a digital marketing agency that started leveraging grants since 2015. There's bigger dollars here because they have more staff as well. $181,000. When they came to us originally, there were 5 staff. I think they're closer to 12 or 13 now. And what they were able to do is they were able to upskill their team members. It allowed them to think bigger. They were able to go into the US market and expand there. And it also, on their personal impact, this is a business owner who had just bought a home. And so by leveraging grants, it allowed the company to leverage different programs to fund more of these activities to grow, and not have the business owner have to borrow against their home in order to facilitate, some of this growth. So I think that was really important, and allowed them to give them a little bit of an edge. Like when the Canadian government says, we'll pay for 50% of your marketing expenses, the benefit of that is that you can then go and do some more testing in the market. You can go and see if, whatever it is that you're looking to do, let's say it's Instagram ads or Facebook ads or whatever it might be, that is actually garnering a turn. So sometimes we were like, oh, I'll just put $100 a week into it. Well, with some grant funding, your budget now doubles. So that's something for you guys to consider as well. And we are now at questions. So where are we at on time? Oh, that was short. I thought we were further along than that, but I think that this serves you guys better to put some questions in here. So does anybody, I'm going to leave it up to you guys. I can use this time for questions. I could also use this time to actually go through a grant strategy for some of your companies. So usually we charge for stuff like that. It's free because you guys showed up. So kudos. But if anybody is comfortable with, and I don't know, Lindsay, if we want to stop the recording in case that there might be, so I'll leave it up to you guys to figure out what that is. But I'd love to learn a little bit more about the type of businesses that you guys are looking into. And then I can just name drop a few different grant programs that I think you guys could leverage. So I'll leave it up to you guys to decide.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you for that presentation. It looks like everyone is a little shy. There's no questions in the chat quite yet. I do have one question for you.
Yeah.
You talked in the beginning about, I guess, the difference between bursaries and grants. And
Right.
what would be the key difference between the two? Or that's just
Yeah. So bursaries tend to be education focused, right? So you have to be a student in order to typically apply for a bursary versus a grant. You don't have to be a full-time student. You could be someone who's just taking a course at the University of Manitoba under the executive program. And so the grant would cover a part of it. Now, when I said that there was some similarities with scholarships is I don't know how many of you guys, and hopefully you guys can answer this, but how many of you guys actually had applied for scholarships? Like I know when I was young, I did not apply for scholarships. And why did we not apply for scholarships? It's not because they weren't out there. It's because it just felt heavy. Unless someone took a scholarship and like put it in front of my face and said, this is the one that you should apply for, and even if they did that, I'm like, I don't want to fill out the paperwork. I don't want to update my, profile. I don't know how to answer their question. Like, so it's very similar in that way. And I will say that with grants, the better you are at writing grants and the more you do it, the chance of success also increases as well. So at granted, we're at 92% success rate. And we do that because we really are careful about vetting the program. We talk to the grantors directly, try to find out what they're really looking for. We assess different grant recipients and go, how do they get funding? And just kind of look into their business a little bit more. So those are a few of the things that we tend to do. Granted, it's a little bit different.
awesome.
All right, here's some questions.
Yeah, it looks like we have a
So how different is it for a nonprofit organization to apply for a grant compared to business? Oh, thank you for mentioning that. So nonprofit organizations have a completely expanded bucket of funding. I can't even say it's a different bucket because some of these grants that we work on the for-profit side also apply to nonprofits. But what's interesting was nonprofits tend to get a little bit of a boost up. So maybe if you are a for-profit organization, you can only apply for 50% of eligible costs. With a nonprofit, you might be able to apply for 75%. I will say that the Canadian government is also moving into, are you a nonprofit or are you a charity? And I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, but it's important to maybe speak to somebody who knows a little bit more about the risks and the responsibilities associated with each of those types of entities, because they are quite different, especially how you report on taxes and your legalities and things like that associated with who, if you are part of a nonprofit or a charity. And so the key thing is with nonprofits, you guys have a bigger bucket of money as well that for-profits can't even touch. So WD is one of the examples of that. If you're a nonprofit, you can go after that. Or some of you guys may have heard of some of these other programs through like Canadian Tire for like sports, or we have an organization in Vancouver called the Vancouver Foundation, and it supports nonprofit organizations in a variety of different ways. So some are BIPOC related programs, some are programs that are related to women or disadvantaged youth, whatever it might be. No, for-profits don't usually get invited to apply for those, just nonprofits. So that's kind of the key difference there. In terms of how they look at it, I will say very similarly in terms of how they assess. They want to make sure that you have a team. So if you're a nonprofit company of one person, the question is, why are you applying for $300,000 to say, oh, I'm going to grow this? And if something were to happen to you, like you won the lottery, would you just take off and not go and execute these grant activities? So just making sure that your organization is set up for some success. So if you are looking at the nonprofit side of things, I would say set it up, get a few pilot projects going. It might be a little bit more sweat equity and time in that way. And then you've got some something to share when you go and write a grant application up. So there's that. Curious what made you want to start doing a grant? Oh, yes. I'll go into my story a little bit. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. Like never. I thought it was the dumbest thing for people to be having to work on the weekends and the evenings. I wanted to be a marketing guru for like a Air Canada or, WestJet or someone like that, because then you get to travel the world and then you get to do some fun things like marketing and you get to spend somebody else's money to do it. That was literally my goal in life. And then I realized, because I am fourth generation entrepreneur, that there's so many people that I know that never leveraged grants. And I was exposed to grants because I born and raised in Vancouver. went to school at SFU, graduated, moved to Toronto, and then I headed to Asia, and I was there for 10 years. I was working for this manufacturing facility that got $3 million US in grants and 0% interest loans. 3 million. And I went, this little tiny island of Taiwan, which has like, I don't know, like 30 million people on it, maybe. So similar population to Canada, maybe 25 million people on the size of island like Vancouver Island. If they're able to dish out $3 million for a small to medium sized manufacturer, what could Canada do? So then I moved back after the Olympics in 2010, and I went, I don't know if anyone does this, but I kind of want to be this like consultant for businesses to access grants. And it was also because my son at the time was 3 and my husband was still in Asia. I moved back first and then he followed shortly after. And so I was like, how am I going to be able to pick my kid up at like, 11 o'clock after dropping him off at daycare at 9? This is the next level of problems that you guys will have when you become parents. Okay. It's like, how do I do that? And because then you're only working 2 hours. And so I decided, okay, I probably have to start my own business. And the other side of things that bothered me was because I was 4th generation entrepreneur, I grew up with parents who owned a corner store. I don't think they exist very much anymore, but like a convenience store. And they always had to work evenings and weekends. And I was never able to have dinner with my parents together. Like never. One would have to be at the front of the store while the other one ate at the back with us, and then they would switch. And I thought, why? Like, why don't they just hire someone? And then the question is, well, it takes money to hire someone. Well, they can just get a grant for it. And that's where it ties into my childhood. So some of you guys are creating these businesses, which are amazing because you have identified a problem that have impacted you personally. This is a problem that had impacted me personally. And so I don't want to see that happen with business owners where I'm still working evenings, I'm still working weekends, like that didn't change, but I know that, our company is set up for success, and we're helping a lot of businesses. And I wanted to develop a business that has impact. And the impact that we've created, I know the stat on our website says something like $40 million. I think we're closer to $50 million in secured funding now. And so those are dollars that probably these businesses would not have been able to leverage without some support from us, because it's just, where do they find the time to go and do this stuff, right? So Leon, thanks for asking that. You got an earful about my life story. But I hope that also serves for some feedback, like just, how did I do it and why did I do it? So thanks for asking that question. Okay, Samuel, what strategies do you have in place for digital marketing consulting firm to access grants? Okay, so digital marketing is a very unique industry because you could cross over into technology for some of these hiring grants. There are programs like Digital Will, which will be closing on the 15th for the fall intake, but it will open again likely in January. Programs like Venture for Canada closes on the 19th. And these programs will help you hire someone who maybe has SEO expertise, for instance. And that might be not what your expertise, maybe your expertise is in, PPC or in developing digital ad buy campaigns or whatever it might be, right? Or maybe you're like a graphics artist. So some opportunities to leverage some of these hiring grants to include students. There's also a really good program called the Digital Skills for Youth program. DS4Y. There's not money left in that now because it was really, kind of spring. As I mentioned, the government fiscal year starts April. So it was kind of May, June, July, August in that time frame. You might get some slippage dollars, which are dollars that the government ends up not using because people have backed out of the program or they dropped out of the program. But it covers 100% of wages. Now, the first question that Sam might be asking is, could I use that to pay for myself? And the answer is no. You cannot. So as much as I would love to say, yes, you can, the answer is no, you cannot. But you could hire someone who is a graduate of a post-secondary program and bring them on and they can help you. And hopefully the money that you invest in hiring them, $0 because they're paying 100% of their wages, will then garner some benefits to you in terms of sales. So there's that side of things. Now, obviously with digital marketing, things change all the time. Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter are not the same way of, you don't use it the same way as how you did 3 years ago. And so leveraging these training grants to help you understand the latest, greatest associated with the digital marketing trends and also what's required for you to do your job well as a consulting firm. that would be the training grants that you would leverage. And then there's an opportunity to use market expansion grants as well. So these would be, hey, Steph, I've identified there's a target market in France that I think would be really interesting. I want to target them and offer my digital marketing expertise for them to expand their businesses into Canada, because we know how Canadians react to different advertising campaigns. So in that case, opportunities for you to leverage, that type of funding to expand into a new country. And so keep in mind those ones, you have to be at 6-figure revenues. So that's the goal. And that's the other thing, right? Like, as you hear me speak, I'm telling you guys the foresight that you need to have to apply for the next program. If you know that you have to hit 100K to apply for that grant, that's a different feeling of like, oh my God, I didn't even know I had to do this, and having to wait another year because you decided, oh, I'll just stay at 80 grand. Maybe push yourself a little bit more to get to that 100 so that you can qualify for that grant for that upcoming year. So it's things like that I think are really important as well. Cool. Alec, curious touch on grants available for startups in clean tech biotech. Ooh, I love this. I want more information about your business. There's a ton of grant funding for all of these. Like, clean tech is one of the most supported industries right now in Canada. The grants range from, hiring grants where it covers 80% of your new hires' wages, all the way through to STTC, and some of these super clusters that you guys might have heard of, where they've dumped $10 billion. Now, these are programs where you're doing collaborative research, but there's a ton of money for that, for any of those industries that you mentioned, Alec. Also SHRED, IRAP. So IRAP is the industrial, I'm going to mess that up, Industrial Research Application Program, I think is what it's called. Anyway, IRAP would be good for you to bring on, research and development team members to grow your concept, to do a little bit of product market validation, and maybe hiring people to help with that. And that one, I would say, build your relationship with your IRAP rep, because it's one of these ones where if you don't build a relationship, they don't think of you when the money drops into their budget, and then that's it. You have to wait another year. The one thing that everyone at IRAP says is we don't have money. Like, they say that all through the entire year, because what they do is they identify different companies throughout the year that they're interested in, and they start earmarking a little bit of like, oh, they're doing something cool, I'm going to put some money there. Oh, they're doing something cool. So they're kind of like pre-spending in their mind, and then their budget comes, and by the time they allocate everything, they don't have money again. And so then they never have money, but they have a lot of money. They have billions of dollars. So don't let them phase you when they say they don't have money. So like, yeah, I know. Steph Sang told me you never have money, but let me give you an update on what's going on with the business. Let me keep you updated on a quarterly basis to share with you what we're developing and how it's working. And you doing that means that the other hundreds or thousands of businesses that contact them, if they're not doing it, you're going to be top of mind for them, right? It's kind of like being that like badgering person who keeps applying for a job over and over again. And then eventually they're like, I'm so tired. Okay, here's a job, take it. And there's that. Okay, Leon mentioned that you can access grant money by collaborating with a post-secondary institution for R&D. Can you expand on that? Yeah, so MITACS, MITACS, is a really good program where you could say, hey, professor, I have an idea to go and build this rocket ship, whatever. And they're like, cool, could I use MITACS to maybe have a few of your students in rocket science help me with building this rocket ship? Like, sure. So what happens is with MITACS, a portion of your investment gets put in to the school and through MITACS, and then the school then matches you with the talent at that school and also provides you with a professor who is in the know of that particular industry and has that know-how, and they're overseeing the project for you. So I've seen this happen a lot with like protein companies where they're like very good butchers. I don't know if you guys have that out in Manitoba, but they're like the rock star in Vancouver. So they took beans and they turned it into meat, so kind of like Beyond Meat, but a lot better tasting apparently. And they can go and do food science type of projects and be like, hey, how can we get this meat to have this texture, or how could we go and develop this so that the shelf life is longer? And then the university goes and does that R&D for you. And the key thing that you need to remember though is who keeps the IP. So the intellectual property, this would be something that the entrepreneurship faculty would be able to help you with or help you understand a little bit more on in terms of legalities, but make sure you're not giving your IP away. So some universities, and you can work with universities across Canada, it doesn't have to be just in Manitoba. Some universities will be like, we'll do this, but we want some of the IP. And you got to walk away from those a little bit. Go and figure out if there's other partners that don't have that requirement, but still would contribute towards the success of your project. So yeah, in any industry, there might be opportunities. Now, you probably can't get like a, hey, I'm a bakery, I want to change my muffins from chocolate chip to blueberry. Can I get a student to help me figure that out? Like, that's not going to work. But if it's something that's innovative, novel, and requires some research and development, and there's some risk there, there's some opportunity to leverage these programs. But remember, money comes first, right? So you go and apply, but you have to invest something in order to get something back. And so if you bring on a student, I think it's like $11,000 gets covered under my tax, and then you have to cop up $37.50. So it's like 25%. You put in $1, they give you $3, or they put in $3. So that's a pretty good deal. Then you have to start asking, how many dollars can I give you so you give me $3 back? That's what you want to do. Okay. Alec, you're absolutely right about IRAP. IRAP told us this before. Apart from my tax, are there others? Yeah, I mean, any of these hiring programs, I mean, there are programs like the DS4Y program is for startups as well. It's not specific that you have to have a certain age in business. Some of the ones that Alec, you had mentioned, like the biotech, the clean tech, the agri-tech, those have specific industry programs. There's even one for a trucking company. Like if you are in trucking or in logistics, you can hire someone and get like $10,000, all of their pay covered up to $10,000, and their truck driving certificate of $10,000. Like there's opportunities to do stuff like that. So early stage businesses, I would say hiring juniors, like under the age of 30, bringing in students, using the NSERCs and the MyTax for the research and development. Once you're incorporated, use SHRED and offset the costs that aren't covered under grants. Because remember, these grants will only cover people's salaries for a certain period of time. Even the DS4Y program, which covers $25,000 of salary for the first, whenever you hit $25,000 in salary is when it ends. You might be paying someone $50,000 in salary for the first year. The first 25 gets used up in this first 6 months, but you have the last half of the year. So you can leverage, so long as you don't stack. And what I mean by stack is like, oh, I hired this person under DS4Y for 25,000, and I'm going to go and apply for the CEWS wage subsidy, and I'm going to go and apply for my tax, and I'm going to go and apply for IRAP, and have that same person be in like multiple programs, in which case you are making money from the government, but you're also breaking the law. So be careful of that, right? Split out what is research and development, what is the funding you can use there, what are the grants that you can use otherwise. And sometimes I just recommend people think a little bit about that strategy and have a little bit of a plan associated with that. So there's tons. I mean, just pull your list from Get Granted. There's a whole slew of them. So you can get your free list of grants on Get Granted. You go in there, there's a freemium, you can click through that and it'll give you your list of grants. It's only the free list of grants for that day. So if you want another free list of grants, you got to go back in like a month later or whatever, 2 weeks later, whatever, and that list might change. Okay. Cool. All right. How was that for you guys?
That was amazing, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Welcome. All right. If you guys don't have any other questions, I'm going to leave you to, and what I'll do is I'll send the copy of this presentation over to Lindsay. I wanted to thank all of you that are on the call who participated and listened in, because I think this is the message that we need to get out is grants are available for businesses. So use them, because if you don't use them, your competitor's using them. So who do you want to use them? Right? Don't miss out. So I just wanted to share that. Good luck with all your ventures. I'm sure your paths will cross with mine. We are expanding into Manitoba and eastwards beyond just kind of Alberta and BC. And so as I pass through, I might stop by and see Deborah and Lindsay and just kind of check in on you guys and see where things are at.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was really helpful. And again, to everyone listening, we will post this on our website, and I will send out an email with her presentation, a link to this video, and any other details that she discussed today. So check that out in your inbox. It should be there in the next week or so. And just again, on behalf of all of us at the Stu Clark Center, thank you so much, Stephanie. You have demystified the grant process for us, which is huge. So thank you so much. And to everyone who came here today, thank you for checking it out. And we have another webinar happening on November 24th with guest speaker Hamza Khan. So make sure to check that out at umanitoba.ca/entrepreneur.
Yeah, you guys are ahead of your cohort because you guys joined. So get those grants today. All right. See you guys later.